welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast where we slice and dice our way through Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6, 13 minutes at a time. I am your host, Brian.
And I'm Greg, and I'm a teenage Frankenstein.
This chunk begins with Nikki tumbling down the hall of the RV and ends with Sheriff Garris pointing a shotgun at somebody.
Yeah, as Nikki is tumbling around in the RV that Court is driving in a rather haphazard fashion, he cranks the Alice Cooper song "Teenage Frankenstein," which is from a 1986 album, Constrictor. You're kind of a music guy, so I want to ask you this question. Was Alice Cooper popular with teenagers in 1986?
I don't believe so. I feel like by this point it was kind of past his heyday.
It feels to me a little bit like maybe Tom McLaughlin was an Alice Cooper fan in the late 70s and brought that love of, quote, heavy metal, forward and had Alice Cooper do the song, these songs, which is great. Alice Cooper is awesome, but as a hook to bring the MTV generation into the Friday the 13th franchise, it just seems like maybe they're a few years off.
Yeah, very much so. Like when you think about Dokken, when they did the Dream Warriors song for the Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warriors, I feel like they were probably a little bit more like that was kind of their peak of their popularity was right around that time, so it made a little bit more sense to utilize them. But yeah, the Alice Cooper, I feel like this was not a big deal to people that were watching this movie at the time.
Of the age group that would be watching it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of what I wondered. Nikki is then suddenly grabbed and yanked into the RV's bathroom by none other than Jason.
This is close quarters combat at its finest. This bathroom is not big. It's basically the size of like a portalette. And there's a little bit of a struggle, and Jason manages to get Nikki into a headlock, and Court is oblivious to all this up front because he's driving and just blasting the music, and
he's laughing and he thinks she's like taking a dump.
Yeah, because there's so much like ruckus going on. He's like, "What are you doing? Taking a dump?"
And he's constantly repeating how much fun he's having driving this RV, barreling down the road in this RV. So he's kind of having the time of his life.
But the noise that Nikki is making is short-lived because Jason grabs her head and slams it into the wall so far that it leaves an impression of her face on the outside of the RV.
Yeah, ouch. So that's the end of Nikki. She was played by Darcy DeMoss, who early in her career appeared in some aerobicized videos that look an awful lot like what Axel was watching in the cold room at the beginning of Part 4, the final chapter. She was actually originally cast in a part in The New Beginning, the movie that preceded this one, but due to some disagreements about the level of nudity involved, she wound up being recast. So at least she got to appear in this one.
The little interesting tidbit about that is Jason Lives is the only movie in the series that does not feature any nudity.
Oh, good point.
So she picked the right one to be in if she didn't want to be nude.
Good point. This is sort of like the PG-13 Friday the 13th movie. She went on to appear on the show The Bradys, which was sort of a 30-something-esque reinvention of the Brady Bunch franchise. She also had a prominent role in Can't Buy Me Love, the Patrick Dempsey masterpiece, and Reform School Girls that we talked a lot about last season, directed by Tom DeSimone. Lately, she's appeared in Sharknado 3, and she was apparently good friends in childhood with Helen Hunt, so appeared on the TV show Mad About You at one point. These days, it looks like she's an animal rights activist and wildlife photographer. There's an unconfirmed story that her uncle bought the burial crypt directly above Marilyn Monroe and is buried face down. But I can't verify that as completely factual.
Yeah, I saw the same thing, and he even refused to sell it to Joe DiMaggio when he was interested in buying the same crypt.
The only other thing that I can say about Darcy DeMoss, when I was 12 and saw this movie for the first time, she was right up my alley. But it's funny how now that I'm in my 40s, I barely give her type a second look. She's just not. She's got an appeal that probably is best aimed at younger men.
Yeah, it was a very specific kind of like 80s look that had a small window, but I think a lot of guys were really into it. It was kind of like that, kind of like gum chomping, kind of aerobicized, spunky 80s girl. And it was very popular, like in any of those 80 movies. Like she basically played the same character in Can't Buy Me Love. But yeah, those types of girls were very popular, but I just don't think they've aged very well. You kind of see them now and they just seem kind of vapid and maybe not all that intelligent. So maybe that's why they just don't seem as attractive anymore.
Yeah, and that's not any sort of indictment of Darcy DeMoss.
No,
it's just the role that she was cast for would not catch my eye in this day and age. After smashing her face through the wall, Jason bursts out of the RV's bathroom and draws the hunting knife out of its sheath. Court is completely oblivious to the gigantic killer approaching behind him until he happens to glance up and sees Jason in the rearview mirror, at which point Jason then rams this hunting knife into Court's ear. There's a shot then of Court slumping over kind of lamely and almost comically with this knife sticking out of his head. It's not the best, most convincing death that we've seen, but so be it.
I noticed that Jason was wearing a utility belt. Was that something that he had on in the grave, or did he pick that up somewhere?
That's from Bert, the paintball guy.
Oh, you're right.
That's his little weapons pack.
Oh, okay. No, that's a good call.
Court was played by Tom Fridley, who is the son of Ellen Travolta and nephew of John Travolta, our second John Travolta connection to this movie. He's appeared in several of his uncle's movies, but also appeared in The Karate Kid and Iron Eagle.
In 2009, he was in a movie called Oy Vey, My Son is Gay.
And I just, since we've seen the last of Court, I just want to go on record one more time and just say how much I enjoyed that character, despite the fact that he's really not in this movie very much. But if it were not for Demon in Part 5, Court would probably be my favorite character in the series. He's hilarious, and he seems like a nice dude, kind of an airhead and sort of a valley boy. But I thought he was hilarious, and Tom Fridley did a really good job portraying him.
I agree. I like Court.
Now that its driver is dead, the RV hits an embankment at high speed and flies into the air, landing really hard on its side. As it screeches to a halt and ignites a fire, Jason then busts out one of the windows that is now on the top of the wreckage and stands on the side, which is now the top of this ruined RV, casually surveying his handiwork. And it's kind of an iconic shot.
It's very cool. I had kind of forgotten about it until I saw it, and I'm like, oh, that is so cool. And I think I even paused it just to take a look at it, but it's a little ridiculous because the RV is barely come to a stop. I mean, after it like flips on its side and goes sliding down the road and bursts into flames, barely has even stopped before Jason busts out the door, and he's coming out the side door, which is now the top of the RV, and he's not shaken up at all. He's just like, whatever, and he just pounces out and he's on top. But it makes for a very cool shot.
Yeah, he's basically the Terminator at this point. Nothing seems to slow him down. So this burning motorhome is nothing, and he just wants to stand up there and revel in his violence. We cut back to the sheriff's office where Sheriff Garris and Megan are arguing about Tommy Jarvis.
Which I thought was weird because they had so little interaction with each other. Why is Sheriff Garris still wound up about this? Like, he's already taken Tommy, as far as he knows, he's taken Tommy out of town. There was like 2 minutes of interaction between Megan and Tommy, between the bars of this cell. And now Sheriff is still worked up about it. Like, oh, I don't want you hanging around with him. And I don't know.
That seems maybe like it's part of the the friction that exists between Megan and her dad. He's reacting to the fact that she's even interested in Tommy at all, and so he's maybe overreacting to, what he sees as a criminal that he was already frustrated with. But now the fact that his daughter is intrigued by this guy, he's just kind of going apeshit. We learn that Sheriff Garris is a single dad. His wife, Megan's mother, is dead, so he's been caring for her on his own for some amount of time. And she's not necessarily shy about using that against him. So that's part of what I see as a little bit of a contentious relationship.
Yeah, she pushes his buttons a little bit.
Yeah. Deputy Rick calls in to announce that he's actually found Darren and Lisbeth's remains on that lonely wooded road. And it looks like Jason's old modus operandi. So that leads Garris to assume that it's actually Tommy's handiwork, perhaps in a copycat fashion, trying to prove Jason's back, but doing the dirty work to attribute it to this long-dead killer. Garris then leaves to go to the scene and commands Megan to stay put in the sheriff's office.
We then see Tommy getting into his truck, and he takes a few books out of a paper bag. He's parked outside of Karloff's general merchandise store.
Obviously a nod to famed horror movie actor Boris Karloff.
The first book is 30 Years Among the Dead by Carl A. Wickland. Wickland specialized in cases of schizophrenia, paranoia, depression, addiction, manic depression, criminal behavior, and other phobias. The next book was The Dead Are Alive. They Can and Do Communicate with You by Harold Sherman. The description of the book is, in case after amazing case, you'll listen to the actual voices of the dead, contrary, lyrical, entrancing. You'll explore the meaning of out-of-body experiences and learn how spirits of the dead can be seen as well as heard. Sherman also wrote some sports fiction books called Block That Kick, It's a Pass, Strike 'Em Out, Under the Basket, and The Tennis Terror. Those all sound pretty amazing. And then the third book that Tommy pulls out is called A Manual of Occultism, which is written by Cephariel, which is a nom de plume of Dr. Walter Gorn Old, who is a well-known and respected astrologer in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But Tommy starts flipping through A Manual of Occultism in particular, but he's flipping through it like a phone book, like he knows exactly what he's looking for, and he stops on one page, and he's like, this is what I'm looking for. But I want to know more about this Karloff's general maintenance store that's apparently open in the middle of the night and carries these very specific books that Tommy was looking for.
Yeah, what kind of general store has an occult section? And yeah, like you say, is open quite late into the night.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he got them at that store or if he just happened to park his truck in front of the store to start reading them.
That's true. Maybe he bought them at a used bookstore and then stopped at Karloff's general merchandise to get some iced tea or some fresh underpants or something.
Yeah, but they're just very specific books that, for something, with Jason just coming to life a day ago, basically, Tommy knows specifically what to be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, they'd actually be easy to get a hold of in this day and age. They're all available on Amazon. But, some roadside general store in rural New Jersey, it does not seem like the kind of thing that would stock these books in any great quantity. We seem to be full on embracing the supernatural aspect of Jason's revival at this point. Tommy's doing occult research to figure out how to deal with this new threat. And so obviously his brain is going down some avenues that defy logical explanation.
It's not something that we need to necessarily figure out right this second, but I do want to kind of plant the seed as we keep going forward. But this, Jason has shown in previous movies that he can take a beating, but this is the first actual time that he has returned from the dead. And so it'd be interesting to kind of keep track of what he's capable of enduring now that he is undead.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they ramp up the amount of punishment Jason can take, or, what lengths they'll go to prove that he's basically invulnerable at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
We get some more shots of him basically wandering around the woods aimlessly, and in fact, he's often going in opposite directions from shot to shot. So I really am losing track of what they're trying to accomplish with these Jason in transition shots.
Yeah, this is what I meant before with these shots where it's like it's not establishing that he's getting closer. It's not like you see the police station or the camp in the distance and Jason getting closer. It's just these ambiguous woods. And like you said, he's heading in different directions. So it's just to show, it's just like a placeholder. Like, hey, remember Jason's still around.
Yeah, he's on the move. Tommy calls the sheriff's office, but of course Megan is the only one there, so she answers. There's something about her in this scene. She's a nice looking young lady, but she almost looks like she's somebody's stepmom, or I don't know if it's her haircut or her makeup, but I feel like they cast an appropriately aged actress, but for some reason she comes off as being much older in this movie than she probably really is or was supposed to be as a character.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I think it's more just the time period where you look at kids that were, cast in high school movies and they were actually in their late 20s or early 30s. Now,
right.
The actress playing Megan doesn't look that old, but you're right. She doesn't look as young as all the other people. She doesn't look like a kid that would be a camp counselor. She looks like she could be, like you said, the stepmother or something that, maybe is the young new trophy wife of a slightly older guy.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should be focusing on her looks here. What we should be doing is talking about what she's actually doing to pass the time in the police station. So she's basically balancing in her father's desk chair. And, she's kind of like got it up on one wheel or something. And she's just got her hands out and she's trying to balance it. And she's concentrating pretty hard. I understand there's, probably nothing else to do while she's told to wait there. But she's spending a lot of time and energy balancing in this chair, and that's when the phone rings and it kind of like knocks her off balance.
Yeah, she goes end up and her feet wind up sticking in the air, but she seems in good humor about it. She knows that what she was doing to pass the time was sort of silly. And once Tommy tells her where he's located, she declares with kind of a bright look on her face that she knows exactly where he is and she'll come pick him up. This gives us a chance to cut back to Jason as he finally approaches the entrance to Camp Forest Green. As he marches through the entrance gate, the camera lingers on a post alongside the entrance that has 6 tenets of the camp. They are listed as friendliness, sportsmanship, integrity, courage, self-reliance, and tolerance. These are not terribly far from the tenets of the Dragon Sound song Friends from the awesomely hilarious movie Miami Connection, which I bring up solely as an excuse to post a link to the video in the show notes for this episode because it's goddamn awesome.
I also wrote down the list as well because I was wondering if that was going to be some sort of clue into how or the types of people that were going to be killed next and in the order that they were going to be killed in. So like someone really friendly was going to get killed and then someone was like a sporty guy was going to get killed.
Like
and then,
the 7 deadly sins.
Right.
Almost.
But, spoiler, it doesn't end up doing that, but they did linger a long time on that sign.
Well, yeah, that's too bad. I mean, Alan Hawes, he's friendly. I don't know that Darren was particularly sportsmanlike. And, I think that Lisbeth certainly had integrity, but then you're getting into like, the cemetery caretaker. I don't know that he was much on courage and et cetera, but yeah. I love that idea. I kind of wish they had done that. That's awesome.
Court had the tolerance to play by Nikki's rules and in the bedroom. And,
he had genital tolerance. Over at the Darren and Lisbeth crime scene, Sheriff Garris has arrived and he's conferring with a new police officer, the hunky Officer Pappas. Deputy Rick then calls Garris over to where he's standing because Deputy Rick has just found the hacked-up remains of Roy, the nerdy paintballer. That confirms that Roy has been killed and dismembered by Jason. All we see is a leg, an arm, some bloody goggles, and Roy's glasses. Roy was played by an actor named Whitney Rydbeck, who was also on the Davy Jones episode of The Brady Bunch. He then played a robot in the episode of Gilligan's Island where the castaways met the Harlem Globetrotters.
After seeing all this, Sheriff Garris tells Deputy Rick that Tommy is working really hard to get people to believe his story about Jason. And Deputy Rick says, well, he chose the right day to pull this shit. Happy Thursday the 12th. I'm kidding. He actually said happy Friday the 13th. So I don't know why this story needs to take place on Friday the 13th.
It's cute,
yeah.
I suppose. There's something about his accent when he says happy Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Then we go back to the camp where Jason has continued his prowling. He winds up severing the phone line, so he cuts off communications.
Can I ask why? Because Jason, as we have seen him, has not had a lot of interaction with people that are using the phone to...
Unless he prank called Alice at the beginning.
Well, no, Alice is the exception. But why would he feel like that's one of the first things that he needs to do is to cut the phone lines?
Yeah, he does have sort of, you're right. He's got this kind of infiltration team strategy for, isolating the enemy. It is a little bit strange. Maybe he learned that from Bert, the paintball commando. Right. Paula is taking a little bit of a snooze, while Sissy is reading a Men at Play magazine. This is actually just an issue of Playgirl magazine with the masthead pasted over it because they probably didn't get the necessary release from the Playgirl publishing company. It's the April 1986 issue with Alexander Goodunov on the cover and Shelley Long from the movie Money Pit, but Shelley Long's eyes have been covered, probably again because they didn't get any sort of release from the actress to use her likeness in a Friday the 13th movie. It features Arnold Schwarzenegger going commando, although I'm unsure if you can actually see his wiener. I did a Google image search for nude Arnold Schwarzenegger pictures.
Which you often do.
I had that as a bookmark anyway. And it mostly looked like what I found was, bearskin rug kind of fireside shoots where he isn't wearing clothes, but his sensitive bits are covered over. There's also an article on the 10 sexiest talk show hosts, which back then would have been like Phil Donahue.
Right. Maybe Sally Jesse Raphael.
Yeah, okay. And then an article about bodyguards in the buff. Despite having several issues of this in my collection, I've never actually seen an issue of Playgirl, so I don't know if it's mainly like fiction and some articles with... I don't get what the appeal would be, but, hey... Put Alexander Goodunov on the map, and we love him.
I also noticed one of the headlines was vacation spots where the men are hot. But then Sissy gets distracted from reading the magazine because she thinks she sees something outside the window, so she walks over to check it out, and she ends up yelling outside the window, and she's like, all right, who's out there? And this yelling wakes up Paula from her nap.
We can hear some footsteps outside, so someone is definitely out there.
They also show a really cool shot of the woods where there's enough going on, and like there's no one in the shot, but the shot is detailed enough that you feel like you need to take a closer look to see if maybe someone is hiding. So it's kind of like, cool. That's what I liked about the first couple of Paranormal Activity movies. You'd see these kind of reoccurring shots where, it seemed like nothing was happening, but if you looked really closely, like maybe something in the corner would move. And so they linger on that shot just long enough where I'm like, wait, is there really someone here hiding? And I never saw anything, but I just liked the kind of suspense that it built.
Cool. Sissy assumes that it's just Court, maybe playing a prank, so she pours a can of caffeine-free lemon lime Brus soda onto whoever is beneath the window. You can hear it hitting this person's head, or, in this case, the hockey mask, I'm guessing. But she's disappointed when no one then pops up in anger at having been doused with soda. She's wearing a jersey with the number 37 on it. And, I did my damnedest to find if that was any reference to anything, but
I just couldn't get past the fact that she was wearing sweatpants with suspenders.
We then cut to a kind of a random shot of the cabin's front door wide open, and I don't get why that's there. She didn't open it, and no one is standing there, so it was very puzzling to me. But she then creeps back to the window, and guess who pops up and yanks her through?
Officer Pappas.
Yeah, with his mustache. No, unfortunately, it's just Jason. He yanks her with such force that her bunny slippers are left on the floor behind her. So he's yanked her outside and then turns her head all the way around. And based on the sound effects we get, tears it off.
Yeah, I think so too.
There's some pretty great editing between the actress's real head and then the fake head that Jason is turning around. But that's pretty brutal. I like that kill. Sissy was played by Renee Jones. She appeared in The Brady Brides, which was a short-lived sequel to the original Brady Bunch series. Another alumnus of Different Strokes. She did lots of soap opera work. In fact, was the longest-running African-American female character on daytime TV in Days of Our Lives, and retired from acting in 2012. She rarely gives interviews of any kind and really hasn't talked too much about her role in this movie at all. Paula is now fully awake and thinks that it's really just more horsing around between Sissy and perhaps Court. But the fact that she calls out gives Jason the alert as he holds Sissy's disembodied head that Paula is awake and still inside. So now he knows there was one other person in the cabin.
We then get a pretty quick cutaway shot of Megan pulling up to Karloff's General Maintenance and Rare Bookstore, and she pulls up in her bitching orange 1975 Chevy Camaro, and she tells Tommy to hide his pickup truck behind the store and ride with her, and they're going to go get the supplies that they need. And we don't really know what their plan is, but they've concocted something up.
Yeah, Tommy says he's going to take care of Jason. I found it interesting that Megan was cranking the Alice Cooper song "Man Behind the Mask" again in her bitchin' wheels. So she's obviously a big Alice Cooper fan. There's a nice shot back at the camp of Jason carrying Sissy's decapitated body past a window of the girls' cabin. Unfortunately, Nancy, the young lady who had been frightened earlier in the movie, sees this and bolts upright in shock and terror.
Yeah, this poor girl's never going to camp again.
Yeah, she's going to need some serious therapy. Back in the Camaro, Megan is rocketing down the road. Apparently, in this short amount of time, they've already procured any supplies that Tommy decides he needed to assault Jason. There's a kind of an amusing exchange where Megan tells Tommy to keep an eye out for roadblocks, and he immediately turns to her and says, "Okay, there's one." And sure enough, there's a bunch of police cars down at the other end of the road. It makes no sense because she absolutely would have seen that from further away and never even had this little exchange. But I like his kind of annoyed delivery.
In an attempt to hide Tommy, Megan slams Tommy's head into her crotch so the cops won't see him. And Megan slams the car into reverse, and the cops start to give chase.
There's a pretty humorous close-up of her crotch. I don't know if it's actually the actress or if they had a body double or something, but it made me laugh. I think they actually cut to it a couple of times. As she leads the cops on this chase, another Alice Cooper masterpiece cranks on the soundtrack. It's Hard Rock Summer. I'm not sure if that's meant to be diegetic or if it's just an exciting car chase song for our pleasure. But given the fact that she's an Alice Cooper fan, I'm guessing it's also meant to be playing on her stereo.
Yeah. One thing I noticed during the car chase, though, is that it frequently changes from like middle of the night to dusk and back and forth. So they were probably cutting back and forth all this different footage, but it's clearly not shot all at the same time.
Still, it's kind of cool to have a car chase in a Friday the 13th movie. We haven't seen that before, and it's not the most exciting example that we've ever seen, but I just think it's kind of fun. Officer Pappas, while in pursuit, radios Sheriff Garris, who immediately recognizes the plate number William Mary 8510. This is an example of the police alphabet code. It's similar to the 1956 ICAO phonetic alphabet used by NATO-affiliated military organizations. Police code was introduced in an April 1940 newsletter released by the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International, with slight variations depending on localization. It's now being phased out to allow for better interagency communications during disasters. For example, a Jason 13 vanity license plate would be read John Adam Sam Ocean Nora 13.
As the chase is going on, Megan tells Tommy that if she can just get to Cunningham Road, she can lose them. So I'm wondering what's so special about Cunningham Road.
It has lots of hills that you can hill hop over.
Right. But I just don't know.
Why is that the escape route?
Right, yeah.
Does it launch them over a river that, like the Dukes of Hazzard or something?
Who knows? So after seeing a sign for Camp Forest Green, Megan makes a turn, presumably onto Cunningham Road. But before she makes that turn, she tells Tommy, who still has his face buried in her crotch, that this is going to be a hairy turn. Hang on. And you probably could have heard my eyes roll from, 300 miles away. So I'm like, really? We're going there?
Tommy's time in Megan's crotch is short-lived because as she turns down Cunningham Road, she's forced to screech to a halt, where she finds her father aiming a shotgun right at them. That's where this segment cuts out. The death count, this chunk, stands at 4. Nikki, Court, the confirmed death of Roy, and poor Sissy, whose head was ripped off of her body.
So as Greg places his head in my crotch as we prepare for a big hairy turn, we'll be back next week with another episode of...